Okay, they are both going. And I will just state for the record then that my name is Michelle Marino and I am interviewing Choice Edwards and I am in Indianapolis, Indiana. And you are in, is it Claremont, Florida?
It is indeed, Michelle.
Okay, and today's date is Friday, November 30th, 2018, and we are doing a phone audio digital oral history interview. And just so I could also state for the record, I do have your consent to record the interview.
You absolutely do.
Great. All right, well, let's get started. When and where were you born?
I was born in Indianapolis, January 20th, 1942, and I believe at what was then called General Hospital.
Okay. What were your parents' names?
My dad was named Elroy Edwards, that's spelled E-L-R-O-Y, Edwards. My mother was Josephine, Josephine Rasdell, R-A-S-D-A-L-L.
D-A-L-L, okay. And where is your family from originally?
Well, my immediate family was right there in Indianapolis, but I think both my maternal and paternal grandparents came from Kentucky.
Okay.
I'm not quite sure where. Paducah, I think I've heard, and Bowling Green, but I can't really verify that.
Mm-hmm. Do you know when they migrated up to Indiana, or had they been there for a while, or?
I think they were probably the first generation.
Okay. Okay. What were your parents' occupations?
My mother worked for the Radio Corporation of America in the factory, and my father worked for the city of Indianapolis.
Okay.
In the Works Department. I believe it's the Works Department.
Okay. What area of the city did you all live in?
Well, actually, we lived on the south side, the near east side, and the near north side. So
okay.
When I was in grade school, we were on the south side of Indianapolis around Fountain Square.
Uh-huh.
And then when I went to high school, we were on the near east side around 30th and Northwestern.
Okay. Did you have any siblings, or do you have any siblings?
Yes, my brother, Michael, and a half-sister, Elizabeth.
Okay. And where do you fall in the ranking there of the siblings?
I think I am the second oldest. I didn't finish.
I'm sorry.
My brother, Michael. I had a half-brother, Elroy, named after my father.
Uh-huh.
And a half-sister, Wanda, and a half-sister, Elizabeth.
Okay. So did all of the kids grow up together in the same household, or?
No. Just my brother, Michael, and myself.
Okay.
We had both same parents.
Okay, I see.
Mother and father.
Mm-hmm. How would you describe your childhood?
My childhood was pretty joyous. I grew up, as I said, early years on the south side around Fountain Square, and in an integrated neighborhood. Although and we got along well with our neighbors. Never had any issues of any kind. We used to go, fishing at the creek and playing basketball and football on the Salvation Army lot, which we thought was as large as a regulation football field, but of course it wasn't. So, and we were involved in Cub Scouts, and that was pretty much it. Nice neighborhood, lots of wonderful people, no issues of any kind, actually.
Okay.
But it was, I guess you'd call a low-income neighborhood around Fountain Square in those days in the mid-50s.
Who were the most influential people in your childhood?
Well, I suspect my mother was probably more influential than anyone because she made sure that we had wonderful Christmases and we had an opportunity to visit our relatives So I think she was most influential. And I can't, a lot of people will say teachers, etc., but I don't really recall any particular teacher that had an influence on me in my development years.
Okay. Did your mom work full-time when you were growing up as well?
Yes, she sure did.
Yeah.
She worked full-time, as I mentioned, at the Radio Corporation of America full-time.
Okay.
So my grandmother, her mother, my maternal grandmother did not. She was unemployed, and so much of the time she raised us, was there supervising us.
Yeah.
And obviously she would have some influence because of the fact that we were with her most of the time.
What understanding, if any, did you have about your family's politics or political beliefs as a young child?
As a young child, I recall hearing people talking about the presidential candidates at the time, and of course it went right over my head.
Right.
But I do know, since my grandfather, my mother's father, was involved in a union. I think he had some position in a union, probably no more than a steward, I suspect. But as a result of that, we were heavily influenced by Democrat politics at that time.
So you were sort of...
And the labor union, and the labor movement.
Okay.
And labor unions.
So you were kind of vaguely aware, particularly through the union, about politics, but not, in any great depth. Okay.
And no great depth at all. I was not a participant of any kind, of course. I was not of voting age at the time. But as around the dinner table and in conversations, people would be mentioning political affairs, and I was acutely aware of the fact that since my grandfather was in fact with the union, that it was more favorably Democratic politics.
Right. So was that something, did they talk more about union politics and things like that, or do you recall them talking about state or, national elections?
National elections for sure, but mostly, but it was mostly supporting the AFL-CIO, whoever they would want to endorse for political offices. Basically, if the union was in favor, then my grandparents were in favor, influenced mostly by my grandfather, who I believe was involved in the union.
Okay. I'm sorry, I'm not very articulate here today.
Yes, you are. Take your time.
I know you said you started school in the Fountain Square area, but where did you attend junior high and in high school?
Okay. And I was, of course, in grade school before the 1954 Brown versus the Topeka Board of Education ruling that desegregated schools nationwide. But so I went to a segregated elementary school, number 19, as I recall, on the south side. And then after 54, I went to Harry E. Wood School for what we call middle school these days.
Okay.
And then I went to Shortridge High School from there.
My husband's a teacher at Shortridge High School right now.
Oh, great! Cool.
Yeah.
I'm in the Hall of Fame there. As
Are
a matter
you?
Of fact.
Yeah.
Yeah. They have a plaque on the wall.
Yeah, I've walked by those. I haven't looked closely at them yet. I've only been in a couple times, but.
It was a great school.
Now, Shortridge was integrated by the time that you went there, right?
It was integrated. I graduated in 1958. And I guess I started there probably in 55 or 56. And yes, it was integrated. And again, folks got along very, very well. I honestly believe that the counselors failed me because I recall I was 16 years of age, and the counselor called me in and said, "Hey, you have enough credits to graduate." And I didn't. I said, "I wish you had said, you might want to bring your grades up. You might want to stick around a little bit longer and bring your grades up." But I did not get that kind of guidance. So I felt, and I suspect, and the same thing holds true today. Guidance counselors just have so many students that they can't really provide very good, in my view,
Right.
guidance and direction for those students, especially those who probably need that guidance more than others.
Sure. Especially, yeah, when they have so many students, it's really hard to give that individual attention.
Sure.
Well, you mentioned Brown versus Board, which was ruled on in 1954, and it's my understanding that, well, that was obviously a hugely monumental case, but it really took a long time for schools across the nation to be desegregated, probably more so in the South. But what was your view? Do you feel like Indianapolis moved along pretty quickly in that, or had the process even begun before Brown versus Board here?
As I recall, I felt like the process had moved along fairly quickly in Indianapolis because, as I recall, all the high schools were integrated.
Okay.
I suspect Crispus Attucks High School, which was originally built just for black students, was probably not integrated very well or very much at that time in the mid-50s, right after the Supreme Court ruling.
Okay.
But I think most other schools, McKellar were pretty well integrated.
Okay.
But of course, subsequent there too, back in the 70s and even in the 80s, there were suits about desegregation,
Right.
because we felt like it was not being as beneficial as it was supposed to. People were not implementing it as much as it should have been. And
Right.
of course, today even, folks are resegregating themselves in schools.
And I know
because of housing patterns.
Yeah, yep. And I know in different parts of Indiana in the 70s, busing was such a controversy as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And, I served on a school board too, and I recall when I was a kid, they used to bus me for segregation, and then people started complaining because they were being bused for integration.
Right.
It was okay to bus for segregation, but not to integrate. I thought that was ironic.
To say the least. When you were in school, did you play any sports or have favorite subjects?
Actually, no. I played sports when I was in elementary school, basketball, baseball, and football. But when I got to high school, I did not.
Yeah, okay. Well, as a child and then into your teenage years as well, what were your views about the state of Indiana or being a Hoosier?
I was pretty proud of being a Hoosier. I sort of thought the world revolved around Hoosierdom. When I would see people, especially people from the South, I would think, boy, poor people, they live down in the South. That's where all the ignorance is. And I knew no better. I thought, again, Indianapolis, I thought was fairly sophisticated. And of course, when I had people visiting, even from New York City, I thought, again, that they were not nearly as advanced as we were in Indiana. But I was a young person at the time.
Or a true Hoosier, whichever.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm sorry, if you can tell me again, what year did you graduate from high school?
1958.
1958. Okay. And then where did you attend college?
I went to Ohio Central State in Xenia, Ohio. And I attended Indiana, what was called at the time, Indiana University Extension.
Okay. And where was the extension at?
It was in downtown Indianapolis, around close to where the World War Memorial is, and some buildings that the university had rented. Okay.
So did you graduate from Ohio Central, or did you finish up at the Indiana Extension?
I did not finish at either one.
Oh, okay.
As a matter of fact, after my freshman year, I thought I knew everything, and so I didn't go back.
Okay. What was your major, or what were you studying?
I was mistaken.
We all think that when we're 18 or 19, I think. What was your major, or what were you interested in studying?
Pre-dentistry. I thought I would like to be a dentist.
Okay. Well, what then did you do after you left college?
After I left college, then I started working, actually. I worked for the Veterans Administration for probably a year. And then I worked for the United States Postal Service for, I think, 2 years.
Are those jobs that you were interested in sort of pursuing as a career, or just sort of happened into, working them?
I was not interested in pursuing them as a career. I just needed to have income and to go to work.
Sure.
So then after the post office, then I started working for Indiana Bell Telephone Company.
Okay. And you were with them for a while, right?
Yeah, I think 3 or 4 years.
Okay. 3 or 4 years. Okay. Well, did you have particular career aspirations, or what did you want to do with your future?
Well, I wasn't sure, actually. I will say this. I knew that I no longer wanted to have a blue-collar job. I wanted to have a white-collar job. and so back in the early 60s, I thought working for the telephone company, and at this point, it was in yellow page sales. And I said, I'd like to try sales. And so I enjoyed that. But then along the line there, after a couple of years in McKella, I decided to go into the advertising business with a couple of friends of mine.
Okay.
So we started an advertising business, Davidson and Hardy Associates. And that led me to become active watching politics again. And as a result of that, I was asked if I would like to serve in the Indiana legislature, and I said, sure, why not? So I went from the Veterans Administration, a very short period of time, I think less than 2 years, to the post office, probably a couple of years, then to Indiana Bell Telephone Company, first as a yellow page salesperson, then as a communications consultant, and then my final position there was as the director of urban affairs.
Okay. Well, what did that position entail?
It entailed, since we had a tremendous, this was at a time when cities were, there were riots in cities over civil rights, etc. And the telephone company has a tremendous investment all over the communities, of course, but in urban areas as well. But a part of my responsibility was to formulate scholarships and grants for organizations that are there to assist the communities.
That sounds really interesting.
Yeah, it didn't last very long, however, because I started working for the federal government.
Yeah, right.
So, yeah.
So as you entered those new positions, and as you're sort of maturing as a young man in your 20s, in what ways did your awareness of politics evolve then?
Well, I think the civil rights movement was the spark for me. I was so proud of the movement and Dr. Martin Luther King that I wanted to do what I could, as limited as it was. And I was also struck by the fact that I recall fairly vividly my grandmother, especially because my grandfather had passed, saying, I wish Martin would just leave things alone. He's a rabble rouser, and he's causing us a whole lot more problems by this movement. And I thought, wow, I don't understand that logic, But we need to be as free as everybody else in this country. So that was the impetus, I think, for me to get involved in politics.
Were you involved in various civil rights organizations in Indianapolis, or part of activist movements?
Yes, I was active as a matter of fact, I was vice president of the state NAACP Youth Council at one time before, before even I went over to Ohio Central State. And so I was involved in the NAACP Youth Council, and I think that was it at that time.
Wow.
Oh, and I attended the National Convention, the 50th NAACP National Convention in New York City, where we had some youth behind Martin Luther King as he was addressing the convention there.
Oh, wow.
And it was a thrill for me.
I bet. Can you tell me more about that experience?
Well, I don't remember a whole lot about it actually, but it was my first time to visit New York City, and I was just amazed at the city itself, and also there was some controversy going on that I didn't quite pick up on because I was, 17, 18 years of age.
Mm-hmm.
Something I didn't quite pick on, but I guess there was some kind of a communist element or something that the leaders of the NAACP were trying to squash at the time,
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't really fully understand it.
Mm-hmm.
But I just remember the experience of being there and with so many people who were pushing for people of African ancestry
Mm-hmm.
to have equality in the country.
Sure. Was that the first time you had heard Dr. King speak, or in person?
In person, yes.
Yeah.
First and only, unfortunately.
Yeah. Wow, that's really amazing. Well, how you said that you grew up in a family that certainly had leanings towards the Democratic Party, and I understand you ran as a Republican for the legislature. Yeah. So how did you sort of switch parties in that process?
Well, as I mentioned, Michaela, I was involved in advertising, and one of our clients, actually both of our clients, one was the Democrat Party and one was the Republican Party. They were asking us to do some work for them. As a result, I guess I came to the attention of Keith Bulin, who was the chair at the time, and
Mm-hmm.
Nola Allen, who was the vice. And I think they took a shine to me,
Mm-hmm.
and they said, would you like to run for the state legislature? And I said, why should I? And they said, because we are going to win. And I said, touche, sold.
Yeah.
So that's how I became involved as a Republican. Prior to that time, I think I was probably registered as a Democrat, but I don't actually recall.
Mm-hmm.
But I said yes, absolutely,
Mm-hmm.
Because I thought, given the fact that the civil rights movement was underfoot and making progress, I thought, well, maybe I can, in some small way, contribute.
When I know
Because I felt like, people used to say, well, if you're Republican, you're an Uncle Tom if you happen to be an American of African ancestry. But I felt the way to change a party is probably better to be done within
Mm-hmm.
than without. And so I felt if I'm going to make any changes, positive changes for the Republican Party to make the tent larger,
Mm-hmm.
it's better for me to be on the inside.
It's really interesting. Well, and Keith Bulin was a very sort of powerful figure within Republican politics. How well did you know him at that point?
Well, pretty well. I got to know Keith pretty well, just from a political standpoint, not so much from a personal standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought he was a great leader, young up-and-comer in the
Mm-hmm.
Republican Party, not only statewide, but even nationally. So I had some respect for him.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And also for Nola Allen as well.
Uh-huh.
Truthfully, everybody that I would say 90% of the people that I met when I was involved in Republican politics in Indiana
Mm-hmm.
were outstanding individuals,
Mm-hmm.
just wholesome people.
Mm-hmm. So I'm a little bit unsure of the timeline here, if you'd help me piece this together. But how then did you get involved with the Indiana Housing Authority, or was it the Indiana sort of branch of the Federal Housing Authority?
Indiana branch of Federal Housing Authority,
Okay.
HUD,
Mm-hmm.
United States Department of Housing and Urban Development. Yeah, I moved over there from the telephone company in 1970.
Okay.
So as a result, I had to resign from the state legislature.
Okay, that's what prompted that. Okay.
Yeah, and that was a little problematic because, as I recall, the legislature at that time was 51 Republican to 49 Democrat in the House.
Uh-huh.
So by me resigning, it made it very, very close.
Yeah. Okay, well, we'll come back to that here in just a couple of minutes. When, if at all, did you get married?
We got married October 29th, 1963.
1963. And what was your wife's name?
Judy.
Judy, okay. And how did you all meet?
Well, as she would tell you, I chased her through the halls of Short Ridge High School.
Do you have a different version?
No, that's pretty accurate. Yeah, we met in high school. I think I was probably either 15 or 16, and she was probably 14.
Uh-huh.
So we met in high school and got married in '63.
Okay. And did you have children?
Still married.
Oh, well, congratulations. You must have just come upon an anniversary last month then.
Yes.
Did you have children?
Yes, we have 2 children. Our oldest is Kelly, Kelli.
Mm-hmm.
And she was 1966, and our son, Kerry, 1969.
Okay.
I sent you a bio. I don't know if you received it or not.
I did, yes. So
Okay.
I know some of the answers to these questions, but I do want to get them on record as well.
I understand.
How did your family influence your career in any way?
Actually, I don't think my family influenced my career in one iota. I just don't recall any particular influence from my family. As a matter of fact, I wish I had more. And the reason for that is I had 2 aunts who were teachers, and I cannot ever recall one conversation with either of them that insisted, you go to college and you finish. I don't recall one instance of that, and that has always disappointed me. Because I graduated when I was 16 years of age, only because the counselor said, hey, you have enough credit to graduate.
Right.
And I should have had, I wish I'd had the wisdom to say, well, looking at my GPA, maybe I ought to stay a while and bring that up. Maybe I can get a scholarship someplace.
Sure.
That did not occur. And so I just wish that they had been more helpful and more encouraging to insist that everybody in the family go to college and complete their education. So I don't think I had much of an influence from family actually. I think most my major influences came from motivational speakers.
Oh, really? Like who?
Zig Ziglar comes to mind. Dennis Waitley. Think and Grow Rich. Authors like that. So I would read positive mental attitude books. That was always very helpful. And of course, I always consider Jesus to be a motivational speaker as well.
Sure, probably the most well known, I'd say.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
I think most of my influence came from within me.
Okay.
And engendered by the works of motivational speakers.
Would you say that your career or your experiences influenced your family in terms of education or in terms of moving around for different jobs? Did that affect your family in any way?
I believe so. I know my daughter. We insisted that they go to college. My son did not, but my daughter did. And since then, of course, both their children are going to college. And my grandson, one of my daughter's son, played football at the University of Kentucky for 4 years.
Oh, wow.
And graduated. Now he and his girlfriend have a apparel business that they started, and they're doing fairly well, but still small.
Sure.
And he intends to play professional football with the new Football Alliance of America, I guess it's called. So yes, I think as a result of you have to go to college. You have to get a degree, and probably have to get an advanced degree. So I would preach that.
Yeah.
Absolutely, positively would preach that, because I suspect I would have been much further professionally in my own professional career had I completed my undergraduate degree at least.
Sure. Okay. Well, I was going to ask about the shaping of your political outlook, but you sort of already addressed that through getting involved with civil rights. So maybe my next question would be, as you initially became involved in politics, what were key issues or legislation that you championed or fought against?
I think I wanted, this goes back a long time, I can't recall very sharply,
It's okay.
but I wanted to do something for people who were addicted to drugs, and also to do whatever I could to stop recidivism. So I think I sponsored, or at least signed on to legislation that would help folks who were incarcerated, and also folks who were under the influence of narcotics.
Sure. Was that an issue that you had seen in Indianapolis, or just things that you had read about, or?
Mostly things that I had read about. Didn't see a whole lot in Indianapolis personally, but it's mostly things that were probably topical at the time, nationally.
Yeah. Okay. Well, who were your national political heroes as you were sort of entering politics?
Brooks, the Republican United States Senator from Massachusetts, whose name right now I can't recall, but Senator Brooks was, because he was Republican, and several Republican office holders. I remember a gentleman named Blackwell, who was a mayor in one of the Michigan cities, and I think most of them really were black Republicans, because I think they felt the same way I did, that we need to have at least two political parties. I happen to be no party affiliated right now, and have been for several years, but at least I thought that we should have, at least in those days, two political parties that were accepting of Americans of African ancestry, not just the Democratic Party.
Sure.
As we used to say in those days, the Democrats don't work for our vote because they know we're going to get it, and the Republicans don't work for our vote because they know they're not going to get it. So I thought that if we can change that dynamic so that both parties have to work for our votes, we'd be far better off.
Sure.
So national Republicans that were office holders, I think, were my role models at that time, or people I aspired to be like.
Was there anyone at the state or local level that you had admired as you were sort of entering the Republican Party?
Yes, Judge Rufus Kuykendall. He was a Republican, and I admired him.
Okay.
I can't tell you exactly why, other than the fact he was a classy gentleman, well educated, and a Republican.
Right. So as Bulin and Allen approached you to run for state government, did you have a campaign, or how did that process work for you?
Yes, well, in those days, we ran as a delegation from the entire Marion County area.
Okay.
There were 15 of us, and we ran as a team.
Okay.
And I think the year after I left the legislature, I think we went to single-member districts, which I was all in favor of anyway. Why
did you like that idea better?
Well, I knew it would be the death knell for my political career in the legislature, because as an American of African ancestry and a Republican, in the district in which I lived, it was all Democrats. So I knew I would not stand a ghost of a chance. But I just liked the principle of one man, one vote, and a single-member district, rather than to have, as the case then with us, 15 all together. Just the principle of the thing.
In what area did you live in at that point in the city?
I lived on, at that point, I lived on East 34th Street, about 4600.
Okay.
On East 34th Street.
Okay.
I don't know what they call that area right now. Forest Manor, maybe?
Yeah, I think I've heard that, yeah. Okay, so as a delegation, then you wouldn't have had like a main opponent. Were you familiar with the Democrats that were running against sort of the Republican ticket, or?
I knew them, but did not know them well, and of course I considered them to be the enemy. So I did not collaborate with them or meet with them. We were on the opposite side of the aisle, so I really did not.
Well, what was most important to you as a candidate then for the State House of Representatives?
Getting elected.
Well, how did you get that message out to the public that you so wanted to be elected?
I was pretty effective at stump speeches, going around and giving speeches, and just basically just talking about the team, the 15-member teams and what we plan to do to keep the progress going in Marion County. As you know, in 1970 we passed UNIGOV, and that was one of the crown jewels of our efforts.
Okay. Well, we'll come back to UNIGOV here in a second, certainly. What was, as you're entering state politics, what was that like for your family? I mean, your wife Judy, and it looked like Kelly would have just been 3 or so years old, and right about the time your son was born. How did that affect them?
Well, honestly, I think they were probably in awe that I was in the state legislature. But my daughter was very small, and of course, and my wife accompanied me to many of the campaign stops, so she had become steeped in it just as a participant, going to the rallies and applauding, but not really expressing much more than that. But I should tell people, as another candidate who was a candidate for judge at the time, and I've forgotten his name, but he used to say all the time, since he was a candidate for judge, if you have any doubt about my judgment, just take a look at my wife. And so I borrowed that, and I would say the same thing.
It's a great line.
Take a look at my beautiful wife.
That's funny. Well, what was your very first election day like? How did you feel?
I felt, this is really interesting. I felt, wow, I can't believe it. I was in awe of myself. The interesting thing, too, is that I was delivering newspapers that day, the day after, and I opened up the newspaper, and there it said I had been elected. Me among several others, of course.
Sure.
But the whole listing was there. But at that particular time, as I mentioned, I was working in advertising, and the income, Michaela, just wasn't there. So I was looking for other sources of income, and I just happened to stumble upon the Indianapolis Star or Indianapolis News, Indianapolis Star, looking for supervisors of newspaper delivery, young men and women. And so that's what I was doing that particular day. When the day after I was elected, I was out delivering newspapers and happened to open it up, and there it was. Hey, I've been elected.
Wow.
And there I was delivering newspapers.
Right. I suppose that felt like you were kind of on your way up then to do something neat.
Right.
Okay. Well, so you find out you've been elected then. What were you thinking as you walked into the State House that first day?
Wow. I think I'm a lead. I think I am in a leadership position in this city now. Where I think I was thinking, and I'm going to do the best that I can, even though I didn't have a clue what to do.
Well, how then did you learn the ins and outs of state politics?
Well, just really being around the party and the politicians. We had, as I mentioned, the people that I served with from Marion County were all excellent human beings, well-educated, intelligent people, and I just really learned from them. They mentored me.
Do you recall any specific legislators or state senators that, served as mentors as you settled into the General Assembly?
Well, I think, first of all, Doc Bowen, the Speaker of the House, sort of took me under his wing. He took a liking to me, and I did to him as well. So, who obviously became governor. Doc Bowen, and then I think Ned Lampkin was a mentor. George Rubin, he was state senator. And I think I learned from George and Ned Lampkin principally. So these, George is an attorney and Ned is a physician. So, how could you go wrong listening to what they have to say?
Right. How well were you in contact with your constituents? I mean, were you aware of their sort of needs and wants, or what was that contact like?
Yes, I would get inquiry, do this, do that, information please, from constituents the entire time. One thing though, humorously, my telephone number at that particular time was, the exchange was, I think, 547-0000. And I went to a meeting, and a woman was complaining about something, and I said to her, I will check that out. Please give me a call. Gave her my phone number. Never heard from her, Michaela. I saw her subsequently, and she said, and this is at a public meeting, and she said, you don't do X, Y, and Z. And I said, what do you mean? She said, I asked you, and she mentioned what it was she asked, which I don't recall. And you gave me, and I asked you for your phone number, and you gave me 547-0000. I said, well, did you call it? And she said, no. She didn't even try. That was my actual telephone number, and she thought I was blowing her off. So
That's
yeah, I had interaction with constituents all the time.
Did you have a particular way that you communicated or interacted with them, such as, sending out newsletters or holding, little town hall meetings or things like that?
No, this was the primitive days of legislature. We didn't have anything quite as sophisticated as that.
Okay.
I suspect, they have staffs and they do all kinds of communication these days.
Yeah.
Very little of that I can recall.
Sure. Would you remember the first bill you sponsored, or if not the first bill, an important bill?
No, I do not.
Okay. What was the regular interaction amongst assembly members like?
Serious to jovial. We could be very serious about some things. I can recall that Keith Bullen, as the chairman of the Republican for the county, would, in order to show some lobbyists his power, would ask certain things be done. And I can recall bucking that on some issue, and I can't recall exactly what it was, but he wanted the delegation to vote a certain way. And stupid me, I did not follow that, and I don't think I suffered as a result of it, because obviously my tenure in the legislature was pretty short. But I suspect had I been up for continuing in the legislature, he'd probably brought that back to me. So it went from very serious kinds of things to jovial. We had, I believe, to quote that philosopher Mancia, if you ain't laughing, you ain't living. So I believe in having laughter and trying to ease tensions with laughter. So we would often, and you're taking me back, of course, 50 years. But
sure.
We would often just have time for laughter. And people should never discount that. I think it's bonding, and people something that will stay with them a lot longer than if you do it in a strident manner.
I absolutely agree. What were interactions like between the majority and the minority parties then?
Nothing like today, I can tell you. Nothing like today in national politics. You know, we actually work together. We actually work together. I remember Bernie White, who was a Democrat from South Bend. He and I, we didn't sponsor any legislation, as I can recall, but we got along very well. You know, we'd go out and have drinks together, have lunch together. It was in fact a jovial fellowship in those days.
Wow. Yeah, I imagine that is very different from today.
Yes. I don't know how it is in the state legislature in Indiana these days, but I'm just saying I know how it is in the national legislature, if you will, Congress.
Right. What differences, if any, were there between members of the House and members of the Senate? Was there much interaction there?
Yeah, but not nearly as much. You know, we did have our caucuses where we met together, but you know, the Senate was more imperial.
And what exactly do you mean by that?
They're a little snooty. They seem to be a little more snooty, I guess, because you know they had been elected by more people, and then they, you know, didn't have to go out and campaign every 2 years. So
Sure.
So, and I didn't understand the workings of the legislature very well. Even then, of course, even while I was serving there, because it was pretty rapid fire. You know, things were coming at you pretty fast. And being a neophyte, I'm trying to learn my way around and do whatever I can to be effective, but with limited power, with very limited power. As a freshman, of course.
Right. What was your relationship like with your seatmate?
Oh, I'm trying to think if John Hart was my seatmate or not. I can't recall.
I should be able to actually.
If not, he was very close by.
I think I should actually be able to see that. It looks like you sat by Faye on one side and Lepar on the other.
Oh, okay.
I don't know.
Well, Wilma Faye, you know, we got along very well. Her husband seemed to be more of an influence on her and even on her votes in the legislature than she was. As I recall, he was an executive with an airline, as I recall, and I think I hope this is not being unfair, but it seemed to me that she would sort of tend to go whatever way he wanted to go, rather than what her own internal guidance was.
Sure.
And I don't recall my other seatmate very well, honestly.
But you just mentioned a name. Was this a friendship you had formed in the legislature?
Yes. Well, no, she was in the delegation. Wilma.
Okay. Wilma. Okay. Yeah.
Wilma Faye.
No, the person you mentioned before that. You said you couldn't recall if they were a seatmate or
John C. Hart.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was also in the Marion County delegation.
Okay, gotcha.
And he was sort of a mentor as well. Although John was a freshman, I think he probably had been around the legislature before, because he was a home builder and became the national president of the Home Builders Association. And I think he was an influence because I think he knew his way around the legislature.
Okay, yeah, so he kind of helped show you the ropes as well.
Yes.
You know, again, I know it's been a long time, but can you walk me through the process of generating a bill? Do you sort of remember the steps or what that looked like?
I cannot.
That's okay.
I would have to go back to my civics class and pick out how a bill becomes a law. It has been a long time.
Well, and you were only in one session.
I kind of recall, first of all, I think it's called the Legislative Council in those days, would help to draft the legislation that you wanted, and they would do some research on it. Then that piece of legislation would be introduced and be assigned to a committee of the House or the Senate, as the case may be, and then that would be voted on and then come out to the floor for final steps that I recall.
Sure.
But I am close to 77 years of age. So.
That's pretty good recall, I'd say. How did you garner support for your legislation?
Again, as a freshman, I was a complete sap. I would just talk to individual legislators, as I recall, but I had no grand plan. And those who were my mentors, in terms of garnering support, I don't recall much that I got from them in that aspect.
Okay. Did you have a sense of how people would vote prior to actual voting?
Yes, but there were times when you'd be surprised. But yes, typically we'd have a sense.
And is that because you would go to caucus, or just knowing from backroom sort of conversations about topics?
In my instance, it was from the caucuses.
Okay.
From the caucus.
Okay. Well, what were the values of the Republican Party during your time as a legislator?
As a legislator, the values were self-reliance, being able to make it on your own, if you will, and mostly self-reliance. And I was not involved too much with thinking, at least, about taxation policy, etc. My whole thing was just being able, and I think this was the influence of positive motivation and motivational speakers and books, that you can, whatever the mind of man can conceive, it can achieve. Conceive and believe it can achieve. And so that was, and that's what I was getting from the Republicans at that time.
And how did that play into your ideas with civil rights, or how did you use that to further civil rights, if at all?
Well, I think the same thing, but it sometimes put me at odds with some people in the civil rights movement. Anytime I would espouse about making it on your own, so to speak, I would get pushback. People say, well, you talk about pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, but if you don't have any boots, you don't have any straps. And so, I would get pushback from people about that. You talk about getting ahead, but if you don't get a quality education, how are you going to get ahead?
Right.
And I realize that that affects more people than those few people who succeed despite having a not very auspicious education, but the majority do not.
So how did you reconcile it, or how would you address that when someone would say that?
Well, frankly, I just kept the same mantra. If you can believe it, you can achieve it.
Okay.
Just keep working, just keep plugging. Never give up.
Okay. During your tenure, what roles did party leadership play?
Oh, a pretty strong role, as I mentioned. You didn't want to cross party leadership because they could come back and hurt you if you wanted to continue in politics.
Sure.
So yes, party leadership was important, and they would exercise their power when they felt like it was important to do that. As I mentioned, just for Keith, trying to appease the lobbyists to show his power in terms of being able to control the votes of the Marion County delegation, he would say, okay, maybe something completely innocuous. I'm going to ask them to vote so-and-so. And I think on one of those occasions I didn't do as he said, and there may have been one or two others who did the same thing. So it was not a really critical vote of any kind, other than to show that he had the leadership of the delegation in his pocket, if you will.
Right. Well, what did you think of Doc Bowen as Speaker of the House?
I revere Doc Bowen. Yeah, I thought the man was fair. He just did a fantastic job as Speaker. My only observation of a speaker was Doc Bowen, and I thought he was fair. I know anytime I would ask for something, he would give it to me, and I can't recall specifically anything I did ask, but he was a fair man. He was a fair man, and obviously a bright man, very bright man, because he became, one of a cabinet officer.
Right.
So a bright man and a fair man.
Okay. We've talked about this at a couple of different moments throughout the interview, but in what ways, if any, did national issues affect legislation in the General Assembly or operations of the General Assembly? Or maybe I want to say that, how did, the social political turmoil of the 60s and 70s trickle down into the General Assembly, if at all?
I can recall one thing that I regret, and that is Doris Dorbecker, and I can't recall if Doris was a senator or a House member. Oh, she was a House member. Doris Dorbecker, during the session that I was in, had a visitor from South Africa, and I started to get up and Doris introduced a young lady that she was visiting, and she was from South Africa. And I started to get up and say, I welcome this young lady from South Africa, but I do not welcome apartheid in South Africa. And I didn't do it. And I regret that to this day. Because I didn't want to, well, I guess I shouldn't say embarrassed, because if you're involved in apartheid, it should be an embarrassing thing for you.
Right.
If you're a purveyor of that.
Sure.
But I should have made the point. I had an opportunity to make the point to demonstrate that apartheid is not good and it's not acceptable, and I failed to do that. So that's about the only thing that I recall from a national standpoint, or international in this case, that I recall that one incident, because it has stuck with me to this day. The other thing was, when it comes to integration, every member of the General Assembly apparently received an invitation to join the Columbia Club in Indianapolis. And I received that invitation. I did not realize that the Columbia Club was segregated. And so I got a call from somebody, I think it was Nola Allen, saying, I told her, I got an invitation to join the Columbia Club. She said, well, is it wired? And I wasn't quite sure what she meant. And I said, what do you mean wired? She said, well, is it going to be approved? And I said, I don't know. I got the invitation, so I think I'm going to send it in, which I had not done. And the only point was that I don't know if that would have been an incident of note or not, had I made the application, been turned down, and then had a stink over it. But I never sent the application in to join the Columbia Club. But interestingly enough, of course, it's been integrated now for several years, but at that time, apparently it was not.
Wow. And
everybody received an invitation, and silly me, I just thought I'd send mine in too, but I didn't.
How did that?
Maybe you don't want to do that.
Well, I'm not sure what I want to ask here, but not how did that make you feel, but did you, you're in the state legislature and yet still being discriminated against. How did you deal with that, I guess?
Yeah, I felt like, wow, I can't, as you might imagine, I felt like, I can't believe this.
Yeah.
I'm being told, I've been elected by the people to represent them, but I've been told that I cannot join a private club because I'm not white. I just felt like, is this real?
Yeah.
But then I realized, well, this is the 1960s.
Wow.
So.
Well, you just, literally my next question was, did you ever feel you were treated differently based upon your race during your time at the General Assembly, maybe other than that instance?
No other time.
Okay. What does the public not know about the General Assembly or how it operates?
I suspect everything. and I say that not in jest, really, but so few of us are involved in politics that we don't have a clue. I listen to people talk about constantly talking about, as an example, Michaela, the Congress, and then they say, and the Senate. And I have to tell people, well, the Congress is two houses. One's the House and one's the Senate.
Right.
That makes up the Congress. There's not the Congress and then the Senate. People just don't know, and since I guess we stopped teaching civics in class in school anymore, that people don't know how government works, even at the local level. I mean, when I go to city council meetings and very few people come unless there is one issue, and then they come for that one issue. Don't know how the process at the city council is supposed to operate. You don't know when they can say something. They don't know anything about the process at all, and it's exacerbated by going to the county council meetings, which I attend some of those, but I've never attended the legislature here in Florida. But people don't know anything about government. All they know is what they see on television when they hear somebody talking about an issue.
Right.
But in terms of being intimately knowledgeable, they don't. So I would say everything.
I mean, I think you're pretty accurate on that, especially at the state level.
Yes.
More so even than the national, but I think you're exactly right there.
Yep.
Do you recall any particular controversial legislative issues during your session in the legislature?
Only the UNIGOV, and that's only because there was pushback, especially from the minority community and Democrats about that. I don't recall much. I just don't. I suspect had I returned to the legislature, I'd had a more seasoned memory.
Sure. Well, what do you recall about the process of getting UNIGOV through, or did you play any role in that?
Just to support it. That's all. Just to support it.
Okay.
I thought it was good. When you listen to Dick Lugar explain why he thinks it's important, it made sense to me because they explained to me, and I could see it, that the core of Marion County was becoming less and less prosperous. So we sort of had a donut with a hole in the middle, and the influence was in the surrounding townships. So the idea was to make the whole thing prosperous by having a Danish, if you will, and making it better for development to occur. And it made sense to me at that time.
Okay. What was your proudest moment as a legislator?
Absolutely nothing comes to mind.
Maybe just being a legislator in itself.
Yeah, yes, I will say that for sure. I think being a legislator, representing my family, myself, my wife and children, and also being an American of African ancestry that's elected to the legislature. And this is the 1960s. There's been, of course, I'm trying to recall how many Americans of African ancestry were public officials back in the 1960s. There weren't nearly as many, of course, as there are today.
No.
And so I think that was something to be proud of.
Certainly, absolutely.
Yep.
I know you served on several different committees, but I saw that you were the ranking member of the Welfare and Social Security Committee. How did you get that as a freshman legislator?
I think Doc Bowen just liked me, and I guess he wanted me to have a profile in the legislature. I suspect he thought I would probably be coming back. But I think just the generosity of Doc Bowen.
Okay. And then, the whole reason we have been in touch here is that you served on the Constitutional Revision Commission. How did you come to get that appointment?
I have to confess, Otis R. Bowen. I was one of his appointees.
Okay. And what do you recall about this commission?
I don't recall much other than meeting a couple of times, and I don't recall much of the committee work that was done. And I don't recall much of it at all. Just a couple of meetings at the State House that I recall, and I think when we finally made our recommendations. But other than that, it's pretty fuzzy, to be very honest with you.
Well, I think that was the commission, though, that looked at some pretty important topics, because I think that was the one where you all were assessing whether there could be 2 terms for the governor, filling legislative vacancies, and the governor and lieutenant governor to run jointly. So there certainly were some interesting things under consideration.
Yes, there were. But again, I just...
oh, yeah. It's been 50 years. I understand. What, in your opinion, is the most important work of the Indiana General Assembly?
The most important work, to do no harm and to do good. I guess like the Hippocratic Oath, to do no harm and to do good. And to listen to constituents, to listen to experts, and to have that help formulate your opinions about any change in legislation or any proposed legislation.
Okay. So you mentioned earlier that you left the General Assembly to go work for HUD. Can you tell me a little bit about how that came to be and what that looked like for you?
Yes, I actually was working for the telephone company at the time, and they asked me to stay on because they sort of promised me, if you stay around, we think we have you on a career path that you can become a VP.
Wow.
But for some reason, I thought, boy, I'd sure like to learn something about housing. And so I thought, well, maybe I can learn what I want about housing, and I'll be happy with that. That'd be my career. I maybe become a housing real estate developer like John Hart, who was in our delegation. So John told me, he said, well, if you really want to learn housing, probably the best place is over at the Federal Housing Administration. And he said, they happen to have an opening right now, and they're looking for someone. And I said, oh, really? So I talked to the gentleman, I think his name was E. Boone Coy, who was the director of the Federal Housing Administration in Indianapolis at the time. And I said, I understand you're looking for someone, and I think they probably were looking for a minority. And so that was the impetus for me going there and applying to the Civil Service Commission to get the job.
Okay. Then...
In competition with other people, of course.
Sure. So then did you have to resign your seat?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And you were in the last session before the change where they went to yearly sessions, right? So you served the 1969 session and then...
Right.
Okay. And then maybe that took place in 71.
Wait a minute, I'm trying to think of this. I thought yes, that's correct, yes.
Okay.
Yes. Indiana, we only had, we served one session in 2 years.
Right.
Now I guess they're serving once every year.
Right.
Session every year.
Yeah.
That's the way it is in Florida, yes.
Okay.
That's correct.
Okay. How would you summarize your time as a state legislator?
Brief.
True.
I think brief, but nonetheless rewarding. And also, I think it set me up to do other things in my life. It opened doors for me. So,
how long did you... what career path did you follow then? What doors were opened for you?
Well, I started working at HUD,
Mm-hmm.
and I moved up the chain there. I started as special assistant to the director of the Federal Housing Administration office. Then I moved up to being the deputy director, and then finally I became the director in Pittsburgh based on my track record in Indianapolis.
Okay. Well, how long were you in Indianapolis, or with HUD in Indianapolis, before you moved to Pittsburgh?
From 1970 until 1991.
Oh, wow.
About
Okay.
21 years in Indianapolis, and then I went to Pittsburgh, then South Carolina.
Okay. In how long were you in Pittsburgh?
I was in Pittsburgh 4 years.
Okay.
Four and a half years approximately.
And then to Columbia, South Carolina?
Yes, for 2.
For 2, and then to Florida?
Yes, I retired then, and retired when I was 55. Still a
wow.
young, still wet behind the ears young person.
Well, that's the best type of retirement to have, I think. Well, what have you been doing during your retirement?
Well, I have been volunteering my time.
Mm-hmm.
Well, first of all, I was chairman of the Superintendent Search Committee here in Lake County, Florida.
Mm-hmm.
Lake County, Florida had an elected superintendent of education, and having served on a school board before, I thought, gee whiz, why would you have that position elected rather than have a professional?
Mm-hmm.
So some people were looking at changing that, and so they did change that and wanted to search for a superintendent, and so they elected me to chair that committee.
Wow.
So we, for the first time in years, we searched and found a professional superintendent of education for Lake County schools.
Wow.
And I've also been, I served in the city I live in, Claremont. I served on the Beautification, Parks and Recreation Committee, Beautification Committee. I was a docent for the Historic Village, which is a small village here in Claremont that has some historic houses and a school library here. And I've been a tour guide for that. I've also been chairman of the Withlacoochee Long-Term Care Ombudsman Program, which is like a 5-county area in Central Florida that I was chairman of. And now I am serving as one of 3 at-large members of the Florida Long-Term Care Ombudsman Council. Basically what that means is the ombudsman visits assisted living facilities, like nursing homes, etc. Make sure that residents are treated with dignity and respect, and that their civil rights are not being abused. So we visit those nursing homes and check on that. And if we have complaints, we investigate those as well. So I did that for 5 years, and then for 2 years I was not doing that. I thought 5 years was enough. And then the state called me and said, we would like to have you be one of our 3 at-large members. Would you do that? And I said, well, sure. So I've done that now for 2.5 years.
Goodness.
And I started a philosophers club here in Claremont. That's one of the started. And soon after we invaded Iraq, I started a philosophers club because I wanted an outlet to be able to discuss political things and philosophical things. And so I started this club in 2003, and it's been going ever since then.
Wow.
So we used to meet twice a month. Now we meet once a month, and any subject. It's more street philosophy than other philosophy. It's more street philosophy. We get together. It's like going to a beauty shop or a barber shop, I guess, and we just talk any number of issues.
Well, there's certainly plenty to talk about. So.
Absolutely.
Well,
I've done that, and I've also been in Orange County, which is where Orlando is. I'm 20 miles west of Orlando.
Okay.
But I've also been an Orange County senior ambassador.
Well, you are staying
also,
busy. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and also I used to volunteer with Seniors versus Crime, which is a program out of the State Attorney General's office, and we investigate attempted frauds and frauds perpetrated on senior citizens and recuperate money for them.
Sure, wow.
Yeah.
You are certainly, giving back to the community and keeping busy.
Yes, and I've done volunteer all my, really all my life. Several commissions and boards that I've served on in Indianapolis, Pittsburgh, and also Columbia, South Carolina.
Wow.
And I write a ton of opinion letters to the newspaper.
Well, that'll keep you busy too, certainly. Well, I know you haven't lived in Indiana for a while, but you certainly were here for, close to 50 years? Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So how has the state changed over the course of your lifetime, or at least your lifetime living in Indiana?
It's become, first of all, it's expansive now. I remember when we had, the townships around Center Township. Now it's one megalopolis, it seems to me. It's just expansive now. You used to be able, when you there was actually a country you could drive into. I mean, a rural area. You drive from Washington Township to Carmel, as an example. Well, there was a lot of green space in between there. I suspect now it's very, very little green space now. So the community has just grown tremendously, and it's become much more sophisticated than it was. And it's still a great place to live. I just can't quite take the cold anymore.
I understand that.
Weather.
Again, you served in 1969, but we're in Indianapolis into the 90s. So did you have any sense of how the General Assembly changed, or were you paying attention, I guess?
I wasn't really paying attention, but I do know this. Just because of technology, it has changed. I suspect that the Legislative Council, as was called then, probably has more staff. I believe the individual legislators have some staff now, whereas we did not have.
Yeah.
I think the individual legislators have staff. I don't know if they have individual offices or not. We had no offices. We just met on the floor of the House. I don't know if they now have individual offices or not. They do in Florida.
Yeah, I think they do have pretty small offices over there. They condensed the floors, I think at least around the Senate, to be a little bit smaller, and then they have smaller offices.
Yeah.
So
that, plus the fact that you said, of course, now they meet every year. So I think that it's just become a much more, like everything in life, it evolves, and it's become a much more sophisticated operation.
Well, my final question is, in your opinion, what, if any, enduring qualities do Hoosiers still have or hold dear?
I think a quest for good education. I'm pretty sure this is not just Indianapolis, but the entire state, a quest for good health care. And I hope this is true, a desire to have a much more diverse and integrated society.
Okay. Well, I think we've covered a lot of topics here. Is there anything that I haven't asked, or any topic that you want to talk about that we haven't gone over?
I think that you covered everything and done a tremendous job.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, it has been a pleasure talking with you today, and I really appreciate you taking the time out of what I think is still a very busy schedule to chat with me.
Well, thank you, Michaela. I appreciate the opportunity, and you've done a magnificent job.
Oh, well, thank you so much. And I will make sure to get those forms in the mail to you in the next day or so, and then I will just watch for them to be mailed back.
It sounds like a winner.
Okay, well, thank you.
Have an outstanding day.
You do the same. Thank you so much, Joyce.
Bye-bye.
Bye.